Alderaan was not destroyed by the Death Star. It disappeared, and the Empire was far too pleased with itself to investigate what had actually happened. Grand Moff Tarkin stood inside the Death Star's command center and watched Alderaan through the main viewport. Princess Leia had refused to reveal the location of the rebel base, or rather, she had actually provided a location, but Tarkin had zero intention of honoring the agreement. He had brought the Death Star to Alderaan to make a demonstration, and demonstrations generally suffered when the condemned planet was permitted to survive. Tarkin turned toward the weapons officers and calmly told them, "You may fire when ready." The order passed through the station. Reactor systems activated, energy surged through the superlaser's focusing array, and the massive beam struck Alderaan. Every Imperial officer expected the planet to explode into a glorious wall of fire. Instead, Alderaan flickered. For less than a second, its atmosphere, oceans, cities, mountains, and forests became completely transparent. Then the entire planet simply disappeared. There was no expanding fireball, no planetary core rupture, and no cloud of molten debris spreading across the system. There was only a violent burst of light, a widening field of sensor interference, and several thousand prepared mineral fragments scattering through the space where Alderaan used to be. The Imperial Command Center erupted in wild applause. Tarkin smiled, Leia collapsed, and Darth Vader remained completely motionless. At the primary sensor station, an officer examined the incoming readings and frowned deeply. The system no longer registered a visible world, but it did detect a confused, overlapping field of gravitational contacts spread across the apparent debris. The false asteroid field divided Alderaan's mass into thousands of bizarre sensor echoes. Some readings resembled planetary fragments, others resembled severe equipment failure, and several stubbornly insisted that the entire planet remained present, though none could agree on where. The officer turned toward Tarkin and cautiously reported, "Grand Moff, the gravitational data is inconsistent." Tarkin did not look away from the viewport. "The remains of the planet are interfering with your sensors," Tarkin replied. The officer checked the energy output again. The superlaser had discharged at full strength, but the expected planetary detonation signature was completely absent. He tried again, saying, "The weapon logs do not show a conventional core rupture." Tarkin finally turned around. "Was Alderaan visible before we fired?" Tarkin asked. The officer answered, "Yes, sir." Tarkin then asked, "Is Alderaan visible now?" The officer looked back through the viewport and admitted, "No, sir." Tarkin nodded. Then the weapon functioned. The officer slowly returned to his station. Questioning the demonstration would require contradicting Tarkin directly in front of Darth Vader, and there were much easier methods of ending a military career. Behind 17 layers of encrypted firing data, a hidden notification appeared on a terminal for 11 seconds. AT-ATN protocol engaged. External phase network accepted. Target transition successful. Return sequence unavailable. No one opened it. The system automatically filed the notification under non-critical environmental anomalies, a folder that already contained 14,000 unresolved reports involving reactor noise, artificial gravity fluctuations, damaged ventilation, and repeated complaints that the detention level smelled unusual. The Death Star had fired. The planet was gone. The officers had applauded, and Tarkin had declared victory. At that point, the truth had already become far too inconvenient. Years before the Death Star became operational, Bail Organa learned enough about the Imperial project to understand one important fact. Eventually, it would be pointed at someone. Alderaan openly opposed the Emperor, sheltering displaced senators, political dissidents, and agents of the growing rebel movement. Bail knew his world would eventually become a target. He could not evacuate billions of citizens without alerting the Empire. He could not defend Alderaan against a weapon capable of destroying planets, and he could not persuade Palpatine to become reasonable. Several senators had attempted that already, and most were now dead, imprisoned, missing, or serving on administrative committees whose findings were never read. Bail therefore approved a plan that even he considered completely irrational. A group of Alderaanian engineers had been developing an experimental transphase shield designed to shift physical matter outside conventional sensor space while preserving atmosphere, gravity, and local planetary structure. It had been tested once on a cargo vessel. The vessel returned, or at least most of it returned to the same location. The lead engineer had considered that encouraging. Bail met with the engineer beneath the royal palace and asked, could this system conceal an entire planet? The engineer stared at him for several long seconds before answering, not with any power source available to Alderaan. Bail placed stolen Death Star energy projections on the table. What about this? He asked. The engineer examined the figures and said, that could provide sufficient energy. Bail nodded. Then we have a solution. The engineer immediately corrected him, saying, no, Senator. We have a theoretical possibility involving an Imperial superweapon, an untested planetary network, and precise coordination across systems we do not control. Bail replied, so, a difficult solution. It may tear Alderaan apart, the engineer warned. The Death Star will certainly tear Alderaan apart, Bail answered. The engineer leaned back. There was no productive response to that. The planetary network received the designation AT-IN, short for the Atmospheric Tachyon Transphase Invisibility Network. The name had been selected because Alderaanian defense committees refused to approve any project unless its title required a separate explanatory document. Phase emitters were installed beneath cities, oceans, mountain ranges, and several royal estates, whose owners were informed that they were receiving updated climate control systems. That was not entirely false. The equipment affected the climate, but it also shifted the planet partially outside normal space. Bail then arranged for a matching activation protocol to be inserted into the Death Star's targeting network. This required stolen Imperial credentials, 3 compromised contractors, 2 rebel slicers, and 1 Imperial systems analyst who had grown tired of receiving technical instructions from officers unable to operate their own datapads. Bail gave the analyst the activation program and instructed him, place this inside the superlaser targeting system. The analyst studied the code and asked, what does it do? If the station targets Alderaan, the first energy surge will activate our defense network, Bail replied. Will that stop the weapon? The analyst asked. Bail answered honestly, saying, I do not know. The analyst considered the response for a moment and asked, will anyone be testing it? No, Bail said. The analyst nodded. For some reason, that made the project sound far more Imperial. The completed protocol was simple. If the Death Star targeted Alderaan, its own superlaser would provide the energy required to activate the phase network, pushing the planet outside conventional sensor space. At the exact same moment, automated launchers would release prepared mineral fragments and signal emitters, creating a field that imitated planetary debris while splitting Alderaan's gravitational signature into thousands of confused contacts. It was an absurd plan that depended entirely upon Imperial arrogance, Imperial incompetence, and Imperial officers refusing to question a successful public demonstration. Bail considered the odds entirely reasonable. There was, however, one additional problem. The AT-IN network had been designed to move Alderaan out of phase, but it had not been designed to bring it back. Reversing the field without exact calculations could return Alderaan inside its own false debris field, damage the atmosphere, shift sections of the planet at different rates, or bring back only the northern hemisphere. The engineer explained this carefully. Bail listened and then asked, how long would it take to develop a safe return sequence? Years, the engineer answered. And until then, Bail asked, we remain hidden, the engineer said. Alderaan also could not communicate normally while phased. A sustained transmission would reveal the field frequency and create a direct path through the interference. The network could open a narrow communications window for less than 1 second, but every use risked exposing the planet. Only a compressed royal emergency code could pass through before the window collapsed. The engineer warned Bail, 1 message may be possible, 2 would be dangerous. Bail looked at the network plans and said, then we will use none unless absolutely necessary. Are you prepared to let the galaxy believe Alderaan is dead? The engineer asked. Bail looked through the laboratory window toward the bright lights of Aldera and replied, I am prepared to let them mourn us, if it keeps our people alive. He did not tell Leia. That decision would trouble him later, along with many other decisions. He would have plenty of time to consider them, as his planet was about to become extremely quiet. The Death Star remained in the Alderaan system just long enough for Tarkin to record his grand victory announcement. Looking directly into the holo recorder, Tarkin declared, The destruction of Alderaan demonstrates that resistance against the Empire is futile. The statement spread across the holonet long before the censor teams finished reviewing the actual firing data. That was entirely intentional. Imperial announcements were always most effective when released before pesky things like evidence got involved. Darth Vader stood alone near the sweeping observation window and reached into the Force. He fully expected to feel a massive, gaping absence. Billions of lives had supposedly ended in a single catastrophic moment, and such destruction should have left a profound cosmic wound. Instead, Vader felt a bizarre sense of pressure, distance. A vast, thriving population obscured behind something he couldn't quite wrap his head around. Alderaan was not absent. It was just incredibly unreachable. Vader remained completely still as Tarkin approached him, puffing out his chest. "The princess has witnessed the cost of resistance," Tarkin boasted. Vader continued staring out into the false debris field. "The Force remains disturbed," he noted grimly. Tarkin glanced through the viewport with a mild shrug. One would expect some disturbance after the destruction of an entire planet. "This is not death," Vader answered firmly. Tarkin's expression tightened. "What is it, then?" Vader reached deeper into the dark side. For one fleeting second, he felt millions of frightened minds, distant but distinctly alive. Then the phase field shifted and the sensation vanished entirely into static. Vader slowly withdrew from the Force. He could, of course, report what he had just sensed, but doing so would require telling Tarkin that his prized public demonstration had actually failed. It would mean delaying the search for the rebel base, and it would almost certainly require sitting in a room for hours while Imperial engineers attempted to explain theoretical physics to him. Vader had already endured enough administrative meetings for one day. "The weapon has created an unusual disturbance," Vader told Tarkin flatly. Nothing more. Tarkin accepted the answer instantly. "Prepare for our departure," he ordered. Several Imperial automated probes remained behind to monitor the wreckage. The AT-AT in-field detected them immediately and activated its secondary defenses, feeding each probe false navigational data. The probes dutifully circled the empty system, recorded the prepared asteroid field, and transmitted detailed reports confirming that Alderaan was indeed reduced to drifting dust. One probe, however, briefly drifted across the very edge of the phase boundary. For 3 seconds, its optical cameras recorded lush mountain terrain, glowing city lights, and an incredibly stressed Alderaanian traffic controller shouting through an emergency frequency. "Identify yourself and leave restricted planetary airspace immediately," the controller demanded. The probe did not answer. It did not possess the technical ability to answer, and it was already being yanked back outside the field by the planet's defense grid anyway. The 3-second recording was automatically classified as visual corruption, and the probe was later reassigned to monitor routine fuel shipments near Kessel. No one ever reviewed its memory banks. Across the galaxy, Imperial broadcasts trumpeted Alderaan's destruction. Some worlds submitted out of pure terror, while others quietly joined the rebellion in defiance. Alderaan instantly became the ultimate political symbol. The Empire presented it as a horrific warning, while the rebellion presented it as tragic proof. Neither side had any idea that the supposedly incinerated population was actively receiving every single broadcast from a planet that remained right where it had always been. Inside the Royal Palace communications chamber, Bail Organa stood watching Tarkin announce his death on a massive holoscreen. An aide cautiously approached him and asked, "Should we respond?" Bail examined the phase stability display. Any ordinary, sustained transmission powerful enough to reach the galaxy could reveal their frequency. "No," Bail answered. The aide looked toward the console, which was lighting up with millions of incoming emergency signals. "Our allies believe we are dead," the aide pressed. "That is why we are alive," Bail replied cold-heartedly. "And Leia?" the aide asked softly. Bail's expression shifted, the weight of the galaxy crashing down on his shoulders. Leia must believe it as well. The aide stared at him in utter disbelief, but Bail didn't bother defending the brutal decision. He simply turned back to the console and ordered the communications staff to maintain absolute radio silence. The first week of Alderaan's total disappearance was exceptionally difficult. The phase network remained stable, but the return systems literally did not exist yet. The planet was hidden, but it was also thoroughly trapped. No supply ships arrived. No galactic diplomats complained. No Imperial tax officers appeared to collect revenue. a final development that surprisingly improved public support for the project by a considerable margin. The planetary government officially declared a state of emergency. Citizens were informed that the Death Star had fired, Alderaan had survived, and everyone outside the system believed the planet was a pile of rubble. The announcement initially produced overwhelming relief, followed immediately by severe confusion, which then devolved into several hours of intense planetary shouting. During an emergency council meeting, one representative stood up and demanded, "We must reveal that we survived!" "A transmission would expose the field," Bail explained calmly. "Then deactivate it," the representative yelled. "The return sequence is incomplete," Bail replied. The lead engineer stepped forward and politely clarified that an uncontrolled reversal might return different sections of Alderaan separately. The representative blinked. "Separately?" The engineer nodded solemnly. "The oceans could arrive before the continents." The representative slowly sat back down and closed his mouth. Another council member leaned forward and insisted, "Then we should request rebel assistance." "The rebellion cannot repair technology it does not know exists while the Death Star remains operational," Bail pointed out. "We cannot remain hidden forever." "We do not need forever," Bail said. "We need enough time to finish the return sequence and ensure the Empire cannot fire again." That sounded incredibly reasonable. It was also completely impossible to schedule. The Death Star was still out there, and the Empire was actively hunting down the Alliance. Meanwhile, Alderaan's engineers began constructing a safe return program from scratch using incomplete math, all while struggling to maintain a planetary network powered by systems that were never designed to run longer than a few hours. Alderaan remained completely hidden. Food production was radically reorganized, and imports were replaced with strict rationing and local manufacturing. Starships already on the planet were grounded indefinitely, and communications arrays were restricted to passive reception only. The people of Alderaan could hear the entire galaxy mourning them, but they couldn't utter a word in return. They listened as high-ranking senators gave tearful speeches about Alderaan's great sacrifice. They watched rebel recruitment broadcasts feature heroic images of their capital city, and they listened in horror as Imperial officials described their home world as a nest of ungrateful traitors who had gotten what they deserved. One Alderaanian minister watched his own televised memorial service and scoffed. "They selected the wrong music," he complained to his staff. His assistant gently reminded him, "Sir, the galaxy believes you are dead." "That is no excuse for a poor arrangement," the minister grumbled. Another official discovered that the Empire had officially seized all his off-world financial accounts. "This is blatant theft," he declared to his staff. His financial advisor carefully reminded him, "Technically, sir, you are legally deceased." The official slammed his fist on the desk. "Then the dead shall be filing a formal complaint." Bail established one absolute rule above all others. No one leaves the phase field. A single ship could expose the planet, and a single uncontrolled crossing could destabilize the entire network. Alderaan had survived purely because everyone believed the lie, and maintaining that lie required the absolute cooperation of an entire world. Most citizens reluctantly agreed, some did not. A small rogue group attempted to steal a royal diplomatic vessel to escape the invisible bubble, but planetary security cut them off before launch. The group's leader was dragged directly before Bail. "Can survival without freedom still be called survival?" the leader demanded. Bail looked at him and answered honestly, "I do not know." "Then how can you imprison us just for trying to leave?" "Because leaving may kill everyone who remains," Bail said plainly. He ordered the vessel impounded immediately. The weight of that decision followed Bail everywhere, along with every other terrifying choice he had made. Alderaan had avoided complete planetary destruction, but it had not avoided the consequences. Its citizens were safe from the Empire's superweapon, but they were cut off from their families, their allies, their trade routes, and the galaxy-wide war unfolding just beyond their sky. They hadn't escaped galactic history, they were just completely banned from participating in it. Wait, no, that is not entirely accurate. They participated by becoming the galaxy's most effective deceased political symbol, a title that no one on Alderaan was especially thrilled to hold. Several days after the Death Star left the system, Bail finally received confirmation via a passive rebel transmission that Leia had escaped Imperial custody. She was alive, but she truly believed Alderaan was gone. Bail walked into the communications chamber alone. The phase network could open a narrow transmission window for less than a single second, and the engineering team had warned him repeatedly that every single attempt carried a massive risk of exposing the planet's location. Bail authorized the code anyway. A tiny, heavily compressed royal emergency signal shot through the boundary. Alderaan secure. At-Atan active. Do not return. Let the Empire believe. The window snapped shut. The network held stable. Barely. The Millennium Falcon received Bail's transmission during its return to Yavin 4. Only Leia's private royal cipher recognized it. The message flashed briefly across her console. Alderaan secure. At-Atan active. Do not return. Let the Empire believe. She read it 3 times in stunned silence. Han noticed the sudden dramatic change in her expression and leaned toward the console. "What is it?" he asked. Leia closed the transmission instantly. "Nothing," she said. "That did not look like nothing," Han noted, squinting at the blank display. "It was a damaged navigation signal," she replied smoothly. Han studied her face for a moment. "Should I be worried?" "No. That usually means yes," Han muttered. Leia did not answer. She did not tell Han. She did not tell Luke. She didn't even tell Mon Mothma. Instead, she routed a short acknowledgement through a prearranged, compressed frequency, hoping Alderaan's passive receivers would pick it up. Understood. She had no idea if her father received it. Her grief remained agonizingly real. Her parents were technically alive, but she couldn't speak to them. Her planet had survived, but she couldn't return. Every single public memorial required her to stand solemnly before images of beautiful cities that still existed and discuss them as if they were ash. The lie protected Alderaan, but it thoroughly isolated Leia from everyone around her. During the grueling years that followed, she became the undisputed public face of Alderaan's tragic destruction. She addressed displaced Alderaanians who had been off-world during the attack, and she comforted heartbroken survivors who believed their families were dead, begging them to keep fighting. She could not tell them that their families were likely sitting on their couches eating lunch. After one emotional memorial service, an elderly Alderaanian refugee approached her. "My sons were in Aldera when the Death Star fired," the woman wept, looking into Leia's eyes. "Do you believe they felt anything?" Leia knew the woman's sons were almost certainly alive. She also knew that revealing the truth to a single person could expose the phase field and slaughter billions. "I believe they were together," Leia said softly. The woman embraced her tightly. Leia stood completely still until the woman released her. The rebellion desperately needed Alderaan's martyrdom to function, and the hidden planet needed the rebellion to destroy the Death Star. Both depended entirely upon Leia keeping her mouth shut. The first Death Star was eventually destroyed, but the galactic war dragged on. The Emperor constructed another battle station, while Alderaan's engineers discovered to their horror that the planetary field had become self-sustaining. Deactivating it was now significantly more dangerous than entering it had been in the first place. Then, the second Death Star was blown to pieces at Endor. The Emperor died, and the Imperial fleet fractured. Leia considered finally revealing the truth, but Imperial remnants immediately began warring throughout the core. Some still possessed Death Star research, while others were actively hunting rebel leadership. The phase system remained unstable, and the safe return sequence was nowhere near finished. Bail Organa opened the second and final communications window. The message contained only 2 words: "Not yet." The single outgoing burst strained the network so severely that one of the primary phase emitters beneath the capital city failed entirely. Engineers barely managed to stabilize the field before informing Bail that another outgoing message would permanently collapse the cloak and expose the planet. There would be no third transmission. Leia read her father's final warning on her datapad and quietly whispered, "You have been saying that for years." The console offered no reply. She obeyed anyway. Years passed, and the lie slowly solidified into history. History became law, memorial, education, and official public identity. By the time Alderaan's exhausted engineers finally completed a controlled access corridor, far too many people in the galaxy had built their entire lives around the false narrative. That didn't stop the truth from emerging, of course. It merely ensured that every single person in the galaxy would react as terribly as possible. The wreckage of the first Death Star remained scattered across the Yavin system. While most of the battle station had been vaporized, several protected structural sections survived intact. New Republic engineers spent years cataloging the debris, recovering Imperial records, and clearing unexploded munitions from areas frequently visited by scavengers who viewed safety warning beacons as handy location markers. A salvage team eventually recovered part of a protected superlaser data vault. Most of its internal files were severely corrupted, but the surviving records included reactor diagnostics, targeting calibrations, endless maintenance complaints, and an extensive log of Grand Moff Tarkin's daily dining habits. He had ordered the exact same soup 31 times. No context or explanation was provided. The engineers didn't find a file bluntly stating Alderaan survived. They found something much worse, a chain of math that made no sense. The primary firing log showed that the Death Star had discharged at absolute full power, yet the planetary destruction record showed 0 confirmed core ruptures. The mass displacement report recorded only the mineral fragments, and the reactor log showed a colossal energy diversion into an unidentified external system. Furthermore, the sensor logs contained dozens of conflicting gravitational readings that had been manually classified by nervous officers as debris. One engineer stared at the screens and scratched his head. The reports completely contradict one another. The lead engineer sighed. They don't contradict one another. The officers altered their conclusions until they matched Tarkin's press release. Then the team recovered another file fragment. External network designation, @in. They cross-referenced the name with the remaining vault. The designation appeared in targeting software, phase calculations, and an automated system warning that had been generated seconds after the firing sequence. The lead engineer assembled the records in chronological order. No planetary rupture, he noted. No mass dispersal, another engineer added. Energy transferred directly into an external network. A third continued. The recovery captain looked at the gravitational scans. And the target mass is still sitting in the exact same system. The room fell dead silent. The lead engineer finally swallowed hard and said, "The Death Star didn't destroy Alderaan." The captain blinked. Then where is it? The engineer enlarged the final sensor map. Right where it's always been. New Republic High Command was alerted immediately, and Leia arrived within hours. She entered the orbital laboratory, dismissed every lower-ranking technician, and carefully examined the reconstructed evidence. She showed absolute 0 surprise. The captain noticed instantly. "You knew," he said. Leia didn't deny it. "Seal the facility," she ordered coldly. "General, these records concern billions of living citizens." "Seal it," Leia repeated. The captain hesitated. "We have already transmitted a preliminary report." Leia turned toward him, her eyes sharp. "To whom?" "Chancellor Mothma." Leia closed her eyes briefly and took a long breath. Mon Mothma arrived before Leia could even step out of the room, holding the printed report. Her expression was completely calm, which was generally when Mon Mothma was at her most dangerous. "Tell me the report is incorrect," Mothma said. "It is not," Leia replied. "Alderaan survived?" "Yes." "Your father survived?" "I believe so." Mon Mothma placed the datapad on the table. "How long have you known?" "Since Yavin." The answer stopped Mon Mothma dead in her tracks. "You allowed the Alliance to believe an entire planet had been murdered." "The Empire fired the weapon!" Leia shot back. "Alderaan survived because my father prepared for it." "You allowed us to use Alderaan as our primary rallying point." "The Empire used Alderaan as a threat," Leia said sternly. "We merely repeated what every Imperial record claimed had occurred." "You knew those claims were false." "I knew the planet had entered an unstable phase field," Leia argued. "I did not know whether it could return, whether its population remained safe, or whether contacting them would expose them to another attack." Mon Mothma stepped closer, her voice tight. "You should have trusted me." Leia answered instantly. "I trusted you with my life. I could not trust the entire Alliance with theirs." Mon Mothma looked away. The distinction stung because it was entirely reasonable, but that didn't make the massive deception any easier to swallow. "What do you intend to do now?" Mothma asked quietly. Leia looked at the recovered files. "Delete them." "No." "If this becomes public," Leia warned, "every government, reporter, Imperial remnant, Displaced citizen, historian, and opportunist in the galaxy will rush to Alderaan. The truth cannot remain buried, Mothma insisted. The planet is not buried. It is hiding. Its citizens have a right to decide whether they continue hiding, Mothma countered. Leia had no answer for that. Mon Mothma officially ordered the files sealed pending a formal Senate review. The secret remained safe for roughly 11 hours, which was actually a new record for the New Republic. The AT-AT in file leaked the very next morning. No one ever discovered who leaked it, though several departments aggressively blamed one another, and one intelligence officer famously blamed an automated indexing droid. The indexing droid immediately requested legal representation. The first Holonet headline broke before sunrise. Alderaan may have survived Death Star attack. Within minutes, every major media outlet in the galaxy exploded. Secret Imperial Records Challenge. Alderaan account Princess Leia accused of concealing planetary survival. Where is Alderaan? The New Republic Senate assembled for an emergency session. Every single senator wanted answers, and most wanted them shouted at maximum volume. A senator from the Mid-Rim stood up and slammed his desk. Did the rebellion knowingly deceive the entire galaxy? Mon Mothma stood at the podium. The Alliance leadership did not know. The senator aggressively pointed a finger at Leia. She did. Another senator rose. My world joined the rebellion specifically because Alderaan was destroyed. Leia looked him dead in the eye. The Empire fired a superweapon upon an unarmed planet to force information from a prisoner. Your reason for joining remains entirely valid. But Alderaan was not destroyed, the senator yelled. Because its people saved themselves! Leia snapped back. A third senator chimed in. Then why didn't they come back after Endor? The phase system had no safe return sequence. Leia explained patiently. A forced reversal could have torn the atmosphere off the planet. How do we know that? We don't. The Senate chamber erupted into total chaos. Some senators demanded a formal criminal investigation into Leia, others demanded immediate diplomatic recognition of Alderaan, and several surprisingly demanded financial repayment for various planetary memorial funds. One delegation loudly insisted that the Death Star attack be reclassified from completed genocide to attempted genocide. This forced the Senate into a mandatory 6-hour legal debate over whether attempting to destroy a planet carried the exact same legal penalties as successfully destroying one. It did, but they argued about it anyway. Displaced Alderaanians demanded immediate access to their long-lost families. Imperial loyalists triumphantly claimed that the Death Star had never actually destroyed anything and was therefore a completely peaceful station. Survivors from Jedha City objected to that claim immediately. Religious organizations began frantically issuing press releases, asking whether their Alderaan memorial shrines were now technically inaccurate. One prominent group solved the issue by simply replacing every inscription reading "the lost" with the temporarily unavailable. Then came the civilian ships. Private vessels began flooding into the Alderaan system by the thousands. News crews arrived first, followed quickly by emotional displaced families, curious tourists, and dozens of historians who had explicitly been asked to stay home. One luxury cruise line began advertising the first guided tour of the invisible world, before anyone had even verified that the planet could be safely approached. The false asteroid field automatically redirected most of the ships, but others kept pushing forward. A high-tech survey vessel activated its high-powered scanners and accidentally slammed right into the phase boundary. The massive energy feedback triggered severe power failures across 3 major Alderaanian cities and caused the controlled access corridor to collapse entirely. For several chaotic minutes, actual sections of the hidden planet became visible to the naked eye. Holonet crews captured breathtaking, high-definition footage of lush mountain ranges, blue oceans, and glowing metropolitan lights flickering between the floating asteroids. The galaxy now had definitive, irrefutable proof. Alderaan responded by instantly sealing the phase field completely. Every vessel in the system received a single, blunt, broadcast message. Leave. Leia watched the live feed from the Senate Command Center, with Mon Mothma standing silently beside her. They have closed the corridor, Mon Mothma noted. They were provoked, Leia said bitterly. There are thousands of Alderaanian families outside that field demanding to see their children, Mothma replied. And thousands of tourists treating their survival like a theme park attraction, Leia countered. A senator approached Leia with a stack of datapads. We need you to reopen negotiations with your father. Leia looked at the swarming fleet of ships surrounding her home world. No, you need to order every single one of those vessels out of the system. We cannot legally force citizens to abandon their families. You can prevent them from accidentally destroying the world they came to find. The Senate stubbornly refused. Several members argued that Alderaan now belonged to galactic history, while others insisted the New Republic had a sovereign right to inspect the phase technology. One senator even proposed placing the entire system under temporary federal administration. Alderaan's planetary defense grid detected the federal proposal immediately. The planet transmitted a second, final message to the Senate floor. One more incursion and the field will be permanently sealed. The entire Senate chamber went dead silent. Leia requested the floor, stepping up to the central pod. She looked across the massive amphitheater and spoke with razor-sharp authority. You mourned Alderaan because you believed its people were gone. Now that they have survived, you have surrounded their world, blasted their defense field with scanners, knocked out power to their cities, and begun debating who gets to manage them. A senator yelled back, "The galaxy deserves answers!" Leia pointed directly at him. "No! The galaxy wants access. You are mad because they didn't die the way your history book said they did." "They deceived us," another shouted. "Then direct your anger toward me," Leia commanded, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Do not punish billions of people simply because they refuse to die in a manner convenient to your political slogans." The room went quiet. "My father made a choice without the consent of every Alderaanian," Leia continued, her tone measured and unyielding. "I maintained that choice without the consent of every survivor living outside the field. Those decisions deserve examination. But Alderaan does not owe this galaxy an apology for failing to die." No one dared interrupt her. "Withdraw every vessel from the system," Leia ordered. "Disable all long-range scans. Cancel every unauthorized expedition. Do that, and I will go to Alderaan alone and ask whether they still wish to speak with us." When several senators began to grumble and resist, Leia plainly threatened to resign from public life on the spot. Faced with the terrifying prospect of having to actually manage the crisis themselves, the New Republic Senate became instantly cooperative. Every single unauthorized vessel dutifully withdrew from the Alderaan system. The New Republic reluctantly disabled its long-range scanners, the news crews loudly complained, the private historians complained even more, and the luxury tour operator submitted a furious request for corporate compensation that no one ever read. Leia entered the system aboard a small, unarmed diplomatic vessel. Mon Mothma accompanied her as the official representative of the New Republic, and C-3PO tagged along because someone needed to translate whatever the defensive phase field decided to say. The ship carried 0 soldiers and 0 recording crews, a strict, non-negotiable condition set by Leia herself. The false asteroid field surrounded them like a wall of floating jagged rock. Navigation systems instantly failed, and C-3PO nervously examined the flashing console warning. "The field is instructing us to reverse course," C-3PO announced. Mon Mothma frowned. "In what language?" C-3PO tilted his golden head. "All of them, Chancellor." Leia transmitted her private royal identification code. Nothing happened. She waited in silence. Still, nothing. Mon Mothma glanced over. "Will they answer?" "I do not know," Leia replied. She opened a direct, wide-spectrum channel into the void. "This is Bail Organa. Every unauthorized vessel has withdrawn. The New Republic scanners are inactive. We are requesting entry, not demanding it." The boundary remained firmly closed. Leia took a breath and continued into the microphone. "If you refuse, we will leave." For a long moment, space remained quiet. Then, the dense field of false asteroids slowly parted, opening a narrow, glowing corridor directly through the sensor interference. C-3PO adjusted his optical sensors. They appear to have accepted. Leia guided the vessel forward through the gap. Alderaan appeared gradually through the mist. First came its massive gravity reading, then its rich atmosphere, followed by sweeping mountain ranges, deep blue oceans, drifting clouds, and millions of glowing city lights across the night side. The planet was completely intact. Mon Mothma stood beside Leia at the viewport. Neither spoke a word. A sharp chime echoed through the bridge as an incoming transmission locked onto their console. Bail Organa appeared on the holoscreen. He looked noticeably older, his dark hair tinged with gray, but his stance remained as regal as ever. Leia had spent years mentally preparing for this exact moment. She had rehearsed grand speeches, fiery accusations, tearful apologies, and complex explanations. But when she finally looked into her father's eyes, she managed only 2 words. "Hello, Father." Bail smiled gently. "Hello, Leia." Leia looked away for a brief second to compose herself before looking back up. "Did you intend to remain hidden forever?" "No," Bail answered. "How long, then?" "Until it was safe." "It is never safe," Leia said softly. Bail lowered his eyes, his voice heavy with time. "I know that now." Mon Mothma stepped up to the transmission pod. "Senator Organa, the Senate wants Alderaan to formally rejoin the New Republic." Bail looked at her calmly. "Alderaan has not decided whether it wants the New Republic." "That is why we came," Mothma replied. Bail glanced past her toward the viewport. "No ships behind you?" "None," Mothma confirmed. "No hidden military scanners?" "None." Bail looked back at his daughter with a slight tilt of his head. "She insisted. I take it?" Leia folded her arms across her chest. "You nearly sealed the planet permanently." "You nearly brought the entire Senate to my doorstep," Bail countered. "I stopped them." For the first time in a decade, Bail Organa smiled properly. "Yes, you did." The diplomatic vessel touched down on the private palace landing pad, and Leia met her father inside the royal palace of Alderaan. No official recordings were made, no grand speeches were broadcast, and no press releases were issued. For 3 straight weeks, the citizens of Alderaan held a historic, planet-wide referendum. By a decisive margin, the population voted to remain phased out of normal space. However, they also voted to reopen tightly controlled communications, restore private family contacts, and maintain a single, highly restricted access corridor under strict Alderaanian military authority. The legal terms were absolute. The New Republic would receive 0 ownership or access to the phased technology. No military vessels would ever enter the system. No unauthorized sensor scans would be permitted. No commercial trade expeditions would be approved. No historical tour operators would ever be considered. Naturally, the ban on galactic tourism produced the most furious opposition in the New Republic Senate. Leia personally presented the final treaty to the chamber floor. One outraged senator stood up and demanded, "How can Alderaan possibly rebuild its economy without visitors?" The Alderaanian representative standing beside Leia adjusted his collar and answered plainly, quietly, "That is not a viable economic program," the senator scoffed. "It has worked for several years," the representative noted. The treaty passed unanimously. Alderaan remained hidden behind its phase shield. Its people could finally communicate with the broader galaxy, and families separated by the war were gradually reunited through the single controlled transit corridor. The grand memorials erected across the galaxy remained standing, but they no longer represented a dead, incinerated world. Instead, they stood as a quiet testament to the day an unarmed planet survived the most destructive superweapon the Empire had ever built. Grand Moff Tarkin had intended to destroy Alderaan to prove that resistance against the Empire was futile. Instead, his legacy proved that the Imperial military could fire a planet-destroying superweapon, completely misunderstand the physical result, declare a glorious victory, lose the entire battle station 3 days later, and fail to discover their error for years. Darth Vader sensed that something was deeply wrong in the Force, but chose to ignore it because he didn't want to attend another technical debriefing. Imperial technicians logged pages of contradictory evidence, but reclassified it all so they wouldn't get Force choked. The Death Star's encrypted vault preserved the objective truth, but no one bothered to open the file. And Alderaan? Alderaan remained right where it had always been, alive, heavily protected, absurdly quiet, and still strictly refusing most incoming calls. Some worlds fought the Galactic Empire with massive battle fleets, others fought with underground armies. Alderaan fought with an experimental shield, a single stolen software protocol, and the Empire's total, unwavering inability to question its own public relations. This has been Canon Chaos.